Sunday. We do stream our sermons live on Facebook, or if you'd like to go back and re-listen to something, all of those there. There's also a YouTube page that you can link to at the bottom of our webpage that contains all of our sermons from recent months. Also, for our friends worshiping at home, there is an online bulletin that's there for you as well if you'd like to follow throughout the entirety of the service. My friends, you pray with me. Oh God, the wind and the rain and your Spirit moving each and every day. We give you thanks this morning for this community of your gathered people. We give you thanks this morning for our witness to each other and to the world, oh God. Our witness and our testimony of faith, simply in the lives that we lead. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of each and every heart be acceptable to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, friends, for everybody in our world who thinks that there is no resurrection, I want us to remember the words of Jesus Christ. Jesus said, "Our God is not a God of the dead, but a God of the living. To God, all are alive." Now, in this age of polarization, we see a lot of that. Red or blue, Democrat or Republican, all sorts of things that divide us. There are people all around us who live as if there is no resurrection. There are times when people say, when they think that grievances will not be heard. No time when righteousness will prevail. That there is no time when truth will be recognized by all. They say that there is no place where all that you love remains uncompromised. No place where another person's joy is not your heartache. And no place where judgment is a reward and not a terror. Now, the Sadducees of Jesus' day that we heard about in this morning's reading were one of four competing sects, four competing denominations, if you will, of how a faithful person, or how to be a faithful person in a time where cultural, political, economic, military domination surrounded everything. And their rallying cry for the Sadducees, or their modus operandi, if you will, was Torah alone, or law alone. Only the law matters. For them, all the authority of faith was given to 5 books of the Bible that they understood to have been written by Moses. The first 5 books of our Bible, the Torah, the law. And in their understanding of Torah, Moses never talked about the resurrection, never spoke of the resurrection. So if it wasn't in the law, then it was not to be. So for them, there was no resurrection. At the end of life, you simply died and existed no more. There was nothing beyond that. Now, the other dominant sect of the day was the Pharisees, who we also hear a lot about in our Bibles. And their modus operandi was faith alone. Now, during the exile, the 70 years that the people spent forced out of the promised land, the land that God had promised them, those who were exiled during this time, they had to reinterpret their faith. They had to reimagine their faith. They had to understand what their faith was going to look like for them in a foreign land. Because there was no temple, there were no priests, there were no pilgrimages. Everything from their faith had been uprooted, so they had to reinterpret what it meant to be faithful, living away from their community. And following the lead of all the prophets that came before, that for them it was not the keeping of the ritual, the keeping of the Torah that was important. What was important was the way one lived faithfully. For that faithfulness to one day triumph, the Pharisees believed that at the end of time, those who had lived by their faith would be resurrected. Now, the two other sects that existed during this time were the Essenes and the Zealots. And the Essenes, their rallying cry, their modus operandi was God alone. Because they simply wanted to be left alone. They wanted to retreat to the hills, get as far away from Rome as they could. They wanted to stay away from anything that would make them unclean in the eyes of God. They wanted to stay away from anything that would distract them from being holy. And the Zealots, their modus operandi, their rallying cry was Israel alone. And they were militant. They were devoted at all cost to getting Rome, to getting the empire out of Israel, to getting this occupying force out of their homeland. So Torah alone, faithfulness alone, God alone, and Israel alone. Those were the four dominant frameworks for understanding faith during the days of Jesus. Now we know that in our own day, some Republican voters share Democratic ideals. And we know that some Democrats share Republican viewpoints. Because we're not simply defined by one or the other and which box we fit into. And it was the same for our friends and family in ancient Israel. Just like today, those who were purely one tradition were very few. Most people had a mix of different beliefs. To kind of put it in our modern language, there were very few who were red or blue. Most people were purple. The tensions that we see in our Bible between Jesus, his disciples, and other groups probably are paramount and are most displayed between the disciples and the Pharisees. And why is that? I think the answer can sometimes make us a little uncomfortable because we think about the Pharisees in our Bibles as the bad guys. But the reason there was so much tension between the Pharisees and the disciples of Jesus and between us is because we are much more similar than we might like to think. And because the time that the New Testament was written, Rome had destroyed the temple in Jerusalem. And that destruction of the temple undercut the viability, undercut the possibility that the Sadducees or the Essenes or the Zealots, that they might offer a path, a future for the faith. And then during this time, the destruction of the temple and the dissolution of the Sadducees, Zealots, and Essenes really set the Pharisees up to become the leaders of faith, to become the ones who would shepherd in the future for the faith. Now, today's reading, the Sadducees, we see they're trying to trick Jesus with what seems like it's going to be a really hard question. Whose wife will the widow of 7 dead brothers be when people are resurrected? Whose wife will she be in the resurrection if she was married to them all in this life? When they are all raised from death, who will claim this woman as his wife? Now, this question, of course, seems like it's meant to trap Jesus into teaching against the Torah and teaching against the laws of Moses. And behind this question that Sadducees pose to Jesus is an enormous clash of values. Is there a resurrection? Is there not a resurrection? What is the heart and soul and the future of our faith? What is the heart and the soul and the future of the people of Israel? And it's also a question that we know that the early church, they had to wrestle with this, right? Because people began to doubt the resurrection. I'm not talking about the resurrection of Jesus. I'm talking about the resurrection of humanity for us all. and the return of Christ. Because by the time Luke's gospel was written, the words that we heard today, the first generation of believers, the people who had heard Jesus preach, the people who were gathered during the Sermon on the Mount, the people who witnessed the crucifixion, the people who saw Jesus when he walked this earth, that generation of people was dead and dying. And God's promised reign, God's promised return, God's promised resurrection of humanity had not come to pass. So they begin to ask, where is this resurrection? And this question became more profound the second, the third, the fourth generation. Not to say anything what it's like for us 100 generations or more later. This is still a question for us today. There are people who feel trapped, perhaps in a relationship or a job. They drive through life thinking that there's no hope, that there's no resurrection. There are those who live believing that life should be problem-free. And when they encounter a problem, they fall apart because there's no hope in the resurrection. There are those that live with death around them, death of relationships in their lives. It's easier to step around bodies the death of these dead relationships than it is to offer forgiveness. I say there is a resurrection. And of course, there are those among us for whom the resurrection represents so much change that we can't possibly live into that because change is so scary. And for in the law, the first 5 books of the Bible, the law of marriage, the way it is enshrined, it ensured that the deceased, that the dead, could continue to have children. In the law of legal right marriage, that their descendants would continue on. This gives us a promise of some sort of a hope in maybe a biological future for your progeny, for the DNA. And it gives you access to some sort of limited immortality. This family lineage. And in the resurrection, Jesus says that we will not worry with marrying for the sake of immorality. For the sake of mortality. Because we don't need that type of mortality. Because in the resurrection, we will not worry with our family name. We will not worry with the survival of our DNA. We will not worry with the bone of our bone and the flesh of our flesh. Because in the resurrection, it's not a continuation of this world, of this life. The resurrection is a step up, a big, big step up. But it's so much more than we experience in this life. And we will not need our progeny to give us access to immortality. We'll have access to immortality for our identity as children of God, as children of the resurrection. The future that's related to us all, the resurrection, is large and expansive, because at its very core is life, even to the dead, especially to the dead. We remember when Jesus taught us that I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, though they die, they will live. So our story, Jesus goes on to answer the Sadducees who are trying to trick him. And he does this, what we talk about in the Bible study this week, by literally dropping the mic on them. He flips everything around. He uses their ultimate authority. He uses their own words of Scripture to tell them why they're wrong. Jesus quotes Moses. Jesus tells us that when Moses hears God speaking at the burning bush, Moses shouts out that God is the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And since the Sadducees proclaim that God is God living and not God of the dead, Jesus points out centuries before. So Jesus turns around their argument and shows them that they are not dead, but are in fact alive in the resurrection. And closes their argument and proves to everyone that the resurrection is a reality. Now, when we think about the resurrection and new life today, we also want to think about the future of our community and the future of what we will do at Westpark in the year to come. And I want us to begin thinking over the coming days and weeks to think about stewardship, our financial stewardship, and our time and our talent and time stewardship of our community in the coming year. Because in a few weeks, all of us will be asked to submit our pledge, both in time and talent and treasure for the coming year. We'll pledge our support to our tribe, to our people, to our community. Because we belong to a new gathering of God's people, my friends. We are children of the resurrection. And as we gather to await as a community, God's promises that we know will come. God's promises to institute more justice and more peace. And we work toward all of that during this time, this century time. In the coming weeks, I hope that you will join me and others and all of us here in this community to pledge again, over and over, to create a home for the children of the resurrection, a home for us and for all of our community. And I do believe that we are working to make this world a better place that we live in, and that is our job. And we're living up to that responsibility to make this world a better place and to live in the things that God has promised. Because God will move mountains for us, my friends, but God will ask for us to bring that shovel. So, for whatever reason you may or may not be living as if there is no resurrection, let it die. If you are distraught, let it die. If you are angry, let it die. If you're anxious when you watch the news, let it die. If you're worried about our upcoming election, let it die. If you're still trying to protect your place of privilege in this world, let it die. Because trust that God is the God of the living, and trust that you are a child. We are all children of the resurrection. And trust that your enemies or your opponents or your adversaries are all children of the resurrection. Trust that Republicans, Democrats, and Independents are all children of the resurrection. The things that we enjoy in this life, especially that privilege, will not be carried over to the next life. Neither will money, nor prestige, nor health, nor marriage, nor our biology. Because resurrection is the promise that the relationship that begins with God, that was first called into creation, that was first called into being, also continues to create all of us. And in our creation, God declared that it was all good. We are very good. And as children of God, children of resurrection, we know